911, what is your emergency?
Units respond code 3 to a 1050 on the highway. Vehicles are blocking multiple
We're en route
lanes
to the
of travel.
hospital. Patient is currently having
We've got a
cardiac
4-alarm
arrest and has
fire
been
here.
intubated.
Send additional
Protesters are
trucks.
outside of City Hall and they are not complying with our
Out
orders
on 1.
to
Hold the
disperse.
air.
In a rapidly changing world for first responders where it seems that every day the rules and norms are changing, there is one voice you can count on to give you the latest in emergency news. That is Lifeline.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lifeline 911 Podcast with your host, Erica.
Hello.
I am your co-host, Gary, and today we are going to be discussing Always on Duty. Those of us who are police dispatchers and call takers have a responsibility to make sure that we do our part in upholding the law, and part of that is being considered always on duty. Erica, what do we mean by that?
For lack of a better way to put it, that we are held to a higher standard. And whether we are in the building or not in the building, we are still held to the same standards of conduct outside of our workplace. Basically, it's not okay for you to do certain things just because you're not on duty and or because you haven't raised your right hand and taken an oath. At least not in our agency, we don't do that. But because we don't do that, the question then becomes, is it the same for us? And I say, yes, it is. And that's not just my opinion, it's reality. I think some people who may be new to the profession or considering the profession on this side of the headset may not be aware that that is the standard.
Right. I always kind of think of the movie Paul Blart Mall Cop when he's, telling his friend, he's like, I took an oath. And the guy's like, we don't have an oath as, rent-a-cops. And he's like, I made one up. And, that's kind of, I think, even though it's like a comedy movie, it's kind of a good way to look at it because if some departments have their, communications personnel, sworn in and some of them don't. But regardless of which, you're still responsible not only for sensitive data from the NCIC and other CJIS security databases, but as a public servant entrusted with helping to keep law and order, you've got to mentally put yourself in the place of keeping a higher standard because, you've got to be clear of any, moral turpitudes or character issues which may arise.
Absolutely. And I have a story about that. We're talking about it just before we came on air. I was telling you about when my grandmother passed. I mean, it's been many years now, but I was still relatively new to the profession. So at this point, I would say over 15 or 20 years. And I was back home in Louisiana. And we were done with the service, and it was later on that evening, and all the friends and family come over as they tend to do in situations like that. They brought the food, and they're just, we're all sitting around telling stories, and the pot breaks out. And by pot,
like
I
the
mean
crock pot?
marijuana. Nope,
Oh.
I mean marijuana. And I have never partaken, but I have always had, friends and family. It's just been one of those things. It's hard to avoid it, I think. And so this is, all the party favors break out. And I am looking around going, okay. So is this a good idea that I'm here? I'm literally asking myself, is this a good idea? The answer immediately is no. So
Yeah.
as gently and kindly and not as obvious as I can possibly, I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to kill the mood for people who are not held to the standard that I'm held to. I excuse myself and I go inside because they're all in the backyard. And I cannot remember. I feel like it was my dad, but it might have been one of my cousins. I don't remember now. One of them asked me, "Hey, aren't you gonna come hang?" I'm like, no, can't really do that, and here's why. And to their
Yeah.
credit, they were like, you know what? We didn't even think about that because some of them are firefighters. So they're, whether they're held to that same law enforcement standard is unlikely, unless that's changed in the great state of Louisiana. No, they're not held to the same standard as I because they are not law enforcement. Public servants, yes, but law enforcement, no. And so when I said that to them, they kind of cocked their head to the side and went, you know what? Wow, I didn't even think about that. Okay. All right. Well,
Hmm.
when we're done, we'll let you know and you can come back and join the party. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and so important is how you deliver that message. Turning away from those kind of situations, because if you're doing it in a respectful manner in which you're like, I not judging you, but it's something that I can't do because of my profession. I think it tends to make people not respect you, but like respect the profession and the idea behind
Hmm.
it a lot more,
Yeah.
because you're like, I'm trying to hold myself to a higher standard. And while there are always people that are like, oh, come on, it's just a little bit of, one little dance with Mary Jane's not going to hurt you. Um,
Yeah.
I think most people are like, I really appreciate that you're trying to make an effort to do that. Um,
Yeah.
and leaves them with a positive impression of law enforcement, which is something we always want to do.
We absolutely do. And then we'll get back to that, but there's also the flip side. I also have had family members shun me because I am the law as far as they're concerned, even though it's absolutely not at all true. I'm not a police officer. I am not sworn into anything, um, but by association. And
Hmm.
while that was not a pleasant experience, I respected their right to feel how they felt, but it didn't change what I do. It didn't change the way I conduct myself or the standards that I hold myself to. So there's a flip side to that. You get one side where people go, oh, wow, I really respect that. Even if they think it's, taking it a little too far, it's okay. Then you have the
Yeah.
other side too, and you have to be prepared for either one.
Hmm. Because most departments do have written in their general orders something about making sure that you keep yourself above moral reproach in terms of
Hmm.
like doing drugs. Most departments have, you can't, if you get pulled over or anything, even if it's in a different jurisdiction, you have to let your department know, hey, I had this interaction with law enforcement. That way, your chain of command is clear. And also, departments do periodic audits of people's criminal background
Yep,
history.
yep.
So,
Hmm.
if you happen to be working in, a 911 center, and you have done something that maybe not is so good, that's something to consider before they do your next audit. Because it is so vitally important to make sure that we maintain that. I don't want to say purity, but being above reproach. Because
Yeah.
how can we enforce laws when we ourselves are breaking them?
Well, it's hypocritical.
Yeah.
I mean, that let's just be honest and call it what it is. That it would be considered hypocritical. I don't know about you, but I would tilt my head to the side a little bit if I saw a police officer that I know doing something that they know and I know and they know that I know that they both know that I know that that's not legal. So my question would be, sir, ma'am, what are you doing? And
Hmm.
I would think that's not okay. You uphold the law. The very thing you're doing is likely to be something you would arrest another person for. So no, you don't get to do that. And the same is true for us. And I would say if I'm going to be running a person's criminal background, I shouldn't have a questionable one of my own.
Right. Absolutely. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I think more than anything else that is kind of people negatively have perceptions about the police, hypocrisy is probably the the one that irks people the most. In terms of
Yeah.
like, because it's like, well, if I can't do it and you're doing it, then I've got some negative words in my head that are four letters about to think about you.
Agreed. And again, we're law enforcement professionals, and even I can say, if I'm honest, I would feel a way. I would feel just a way about seeing a coworker, whether they be a police officer or just another, or not just, but another emergency communications, law enforcement professional acting in a certain way. We we go out to we go out and have interactions outside of work, team builders,
Hmm.
and we go out and hang out with each other. And it's one thing to see a colleague have a drink or even two, but what happens when we see the third, the fourth, or the fifth? And then they start looking like they're feeling every single one of those. It's okay until it's time to go. But before then, we're going to automatically start thinking, how are you getting home?
Yeah.
Because for us, at least for our agency, I think in Texas in general, if you end up with a DWI, that's the end for you. Whereas Joe
Yeah.
Schmo, Joe Public, they get one, it's not the end of the world for them. Their life just gets harder.
Yeah. And we were kind of talking about that before the show in terms of like, um, for most other jobs, like if you're like you fly out to Vegas and you get a public intoxication and spend the night in the drunk tank and get let out, it
Mhm.
really is not going to affect your life in too much of a way. I mean, you might have some legal bills, but like if you do that when you work for a police department, that could end your career, and
Yeah.
you know because it is really a sacred trust. And I don't even use that word lightly. That the community gives to you as part of the law enforcement, because your responsibility is to keep your family, the community safe. And
Hmm.
if you betray that, by not upholding those standards, then it damages all of us in the community,
Absolutely.
in the law enforcement profession. Lots of times when one bad apple will, create lot of ripples for the rest of the apples in the cart, in this
Absolutely.
profession.
Absolutely.
And so it'd be like if you were, um, out at a bar and you saw, like, I guess a doctor, like your doctor, getting like hammered. Would
Hmm.
you be like, I'm having that surgery next week. Do I want this guy to be poking and prodding me?
Right. And that is so true because even though that's next week and chances are you've never seen them, you know, inebriated or hungover even whenever you went to see them for anything else, it impacts the way you see them. It
Mm-hmm.
immediately impacts your trust level for them because you see them in a certain light. And if you're honest, you want them to stay there. Stay in my safe little box where I think that you should be. Whether that's fair or not is irrelevant. And
Yeah.
the same thing is true for us. Whether you think it's fair or not, irrelevant. It is still the truth. We are held to a higher standard, and I think that we should be. I don't think that we
Mm-hmm.
should be able to do what everybody else does simply because we do what everybody else cannot do. And
Yeah.
that's what that's our profession. But if everybody could do it, everybody would. If it wasn't law enforcement, it probably wouldn't be a big deal. But since it is, there it is.
Mm-hmm. And like, aside from breaking actual like criminal laws, which is a more obvious red flag, I guess. Most departments have sort of rules on association as well, and that's one that most people don't think about because you're like, my friends are my friends, but like our department, you cannot associate with known felons or people breaking the law. So if you
Yep.
have a friend who is a felon, you cannot associate with them and still work for the police department.
Yep.
So that will create some decisions that you need to make
Yeah. Yep.
going forward.
Now, family is a different thing. You
Mm-hmm.
can't, you can't, you can't pick your family, but, but I think you still have a decision to make. Now, if it's someone in your household that is like a parent or a sibling, what are you going to do? And nothing you can do there. But you can be mindful of the time you spend, knowing where they're going and what they're. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, I can't knowingly go along with a family member to do something that I know is not okay. While the department is not going to expect me per se to sever all ties with like a brother or a sister because that's just what are you going to do?
Yeah.
They still though expect for you to use good judgment in your interactions with said family member.
Blood ties are not really severable, but don't, I guess, put yourself in a situation that would be questionable to be in.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that's a really tough one for a lot of people because they're like, oh, they may be dating somebody and they
Yes.
learn something about them, like, oh, they used to deal drugs, or
Hmm.
you probably wouldn't date somebody that was like a human trafficker, but they learned something nefarious about their past.
Yeah.
And that is not permitted
Yep.
to continue because you're bringing into question your own integrity.
Yep.
I believe the colloquialism is, when you lie with dogs, you're going to get
Get
fleas.
up, lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas.
Hmm.
Yes, that is absolutely it. And I have known people through the years that have developed relationships with people knowing, absolutely knowing that it is probably not the best idea. And their justification is this is my private life and y'all, them can't tell me what to do when I leave here. Mm, okay. Well, that might be true on some level simply because what we don't know, we can't
Hmm.
control, we can't influence, we can't impact what we don't know about. But let me just say this, when we find out, you're going to have some questions to answer. And one of them is going to be, did you know?
Yeah, and did you know what this was going on? This was something in the background. And as you said, like, people may kind of look at those policies and be like, well, whoa, whoa, this is my private life. It has nothing to do with you. But when you're working in a profession that has, this special duty to the public,
Hmm.
it is held to a higher standard than other ones. Like,
Yeah,
you can't, you just can't do it, even though, and if that's not something that you can agree with, that's perfectly fine, but this is not the profession for you.
absolutely. Well said. I feel like it would be irresponsible for us not to say, okay, you cannot, should not, do not ever run background checks using CGIS resources to check out your boyfriends, girlfriends, and who's in the never. No, 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 no. You
Yeah.
cannot do that. Do not ever, 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 ever do that. If you find out over the course of time, or just, accidentally, or they slip of the tongue, or, you know, you go and use one of those public, available to the public for a fee background check kind of things, that's different. But you
Hmm.
can't use your access to vet your dates and or your friends. A police officer has to ask me, or I have to have a legitimate uh, reason that is tied to my law enforcement, like the background checks that we do on people to come and listen in and do sit-ins and ride-alongs.
Yeah.
Well, there's no quote unquote police action associated with that, but it is still legitimate because we have to know who we're letting in the building and inside these police cars, and because they will be exposed to information and situations that the general public would not normally be exposed to. So we have to vet you for that
Yeah.
reason. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Aside from the actual, like, breaking of the laws, like getting a DWI, or the associations that you may have with criminals, sort of going beyond that, you also have just the general moral turpitude. So, and this one is a little bit more hard to touch, a little bit more ephemeral, if you will, such as,
Hmm.
like, say you're sitting around the table playing poker with your friends, and you know, slip an ace up your sleeve and you're cheating. Like, even though it's not breaking the law at all, you're like, by cheating, like, you're either, you just shouldn't cheat in general, but just as an example,
Sure.
like, people will see that and be like, oh, you're in law enforcement and you're doing this little thing, then you'd probably
What
do a
else
big
will you
thing.
do? Oh,
Yeah,
yes. What
because
else
I
will
mean,
you do?
yeah, because I mean, if you'd steal $10, you'd certainly steal 10,000.
Of course, because that's how it starts, isn't it?
Yeah.
Most people don't wake up and say, I'm going to go rob a bank today. What they typically do is they take $20 from, I don't know, a family member's purse, or friend's purse, or they steal,
Food
ten
from the
bucks out of the
fridge.
till, or, food from the fridge, or whatever. It rarely starts with the big thing. It starts small, and then as you, well, as your conscience becomes seared, for lack of a better
Hmm.
way to put it, you you justify, and you tell yourself stories about what you're doing to justify and make yourself feel okay about taking it to the next level. And it starts that way too, with checking up on your friends. And I realize the conversation has taken kind of a little bit of a turn, but I still think it's relevant, because you can't talk about associating with known felons, or people with questionable backgrounds, um, or people that have not been caught doing whatever it is they do, but you are aware of what they do. You can't you can't do that. You just can't, and there's no justification, and you can't use resources to help you figure out who you can and cannot associate with. I just It's a sticky widget, I would say, because it's hard for
Yeah.
some people.
What is it they say? If men were angels, you wouldn't need government. But, like,
That's a good
nobody,
one.
nobody expects everybody to be perfect, to be saints. We're all going
Right.
to, um, we're all human and have our foibles. But kind of as you were saying, like, if we are our brother's keepers and, checking and supporting each other, that can kind of help uplift us, so we don't start going down, you know, paths that would not be, um, I guess we'll say, conducive to a long-term career.
Yeah. And actually, just in the moment, I'm thinking of something, because obviously no names or anything, but what would you say to an employee that comes to you and says, I have developed a relationship with someone and it's deep now, and I just found out this thing
Hmm.
about them, and it is criminal in nature. It was years and years and years ago, and I didn't know that they were a convicted felon. But we're about to have a baby. I mean,
Yeah.
just as crazy as it can get.
Yeah.
What
That
would you
would
say?
be, yeah, that would be certainly a challenging one because, especially if they're about to have a baby, then it's not a relationship that, you can just end. So,
Right?
um, like I would let them know I was appreciative of them letting me know that, and, offer them, support services if they needed it. But at this point in the relationship, it's a little too far to stop,
Yeah, yeah.
because once you're baking the bread, you're kind of hooked. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would just tell them to be very aware of that part of their past and make sure that that was and stayed in the past because people can change and do change. It takes a lot of hard
Mhm.
work, but if they're willing to do that, then that's awesome. And if they've got a good support in their relationship, then that's even better. But something to definitely stay aware of.
Yeah. I would that's a sticky one, but if you are in a place where the relationship has not progressed to marriage or, you know, children, would it be fair to say, while we can't enforce it if we don't know about it, the expectation would be for you to stop it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, because especially if it was something that was continuing to happen. Um, but yeah, that is a good question because if they're like, hey, 10 years ago they did this, heinous act, um,
Yeah.
and they've really repented and kind of turned from that path. Um, that's a good question. I'd have to probably consider that a little bit more before.
I would too. I mean, but at our level, line supervisors, I don't think that is something that we would be able to answer definitively. I think we would have to take that up, you know, um, because I can't imagine being the final word on something like that. But I would absolutely respect that person for coming forward with something like that
Yeah,
because it shows that they are trying, at least hoping that probably that could continue based on whatever. But I think as our responsibility, because we are law enforcement professionals too, we would have to. I can't imagine how we would not take it up. We would have to get someone else involved in that conversation. And I realize
yeah,
it may seem like we're going so far off the beaten path, but we're really not because this stuff happens.
yeah. Um, and you're right. Yeah, it would probably require just some more, some much more thought, and probably a little bit of brass to make some decision on that. But
Yeah,
I think with the employee like bringing it to us, it would very much mitigate any negative consequences that may have
agreed.
otherwise happened.
And it's good that we brought that because, somebody who knows, while someone may not listen to this next week, it might be years down the line, and we may find ourselves with a listener that has something like that or knows somebody that might be going through it. So it's important for us to, try to cover as many of the bases as we possibly can because it is a big deal.
Yeah,
It is
and,
important how we conduct ourselves outside of work in our actions, our relationships, just in general. Because
hmm
we are held to that higher standard and we are seen as law enforcement, badge or not.
yes, absolutely. So hopefully that'll give some people some pause to think about whether they're in the profession or thinking about joining the profession because uh, being aware of that ahead of time will
Mhm.
hopefully make that decision easier for you. Because
Yeah.
if you're like, halfway to retirement, you might be like, I'll just let it slide, try and get through.
Yeah.
But if you,
Yeah.
yeah, but if you're someone who's just starting out, you know, and those, you know, facets of the job bother you or you're not okay with, then that's fine. It's just not the job for you, not the career for
Yeah,
you.
may not be. Yeah, you may have to consider doing something else, some other type of public service that isn't law enforcement and doesn't have as strict expectations.
Yeah. Like if, moral turpitude is your kind of thing, then there's always politics to get into.
Yes, you ought to be ashamed. Love
kind
it.
of, kind of one last thing I wanted to touch on was you are also always on duty in terms of being the eyes of the city, so or
True.
the county, whatever you're. And this could be something as basic as you see a pothole in the road, you call to report it to have it repaired. Because
Yeah.
fun fact for everybody, at least in our little town, the average response time to have a pothole repaired, how long do you think it is, Erica?
Oh, I don't know. A month?
The average response time from when it's reported to when it's repaired is 48 hours.
Really?
Yep, just nobody reports it.
Good
So,
point.
yeah. So, you're the eyes of the city. So it could be something as simple as potholes to, if you see somebody in trouble, calling 911 to help. It is amazing to me how often people that work for 911 don't think about calling 911 when they need help.
Well, because they think about all the calls. They figure everybody else is going to call, so they don't
Yeah,
have to be the ones to call. Or
yeah.
they think, they have decided that they're off duty, and so not my problem.
hmm Well, I mean,
Sad,
even
but
for
true.
yeah, even for other things, like I know someone who worked in law enforcement for you know 30, 36 years, and when they had a medical issue, they didn't think to call 911, and it's
What
just
in the
I don't
world?
know. So yeah,
Okay.
you are part of the government's sensory organs. We'll say that. So when you see
Wow.
something that can be fixed, be aware that you need to pipe up and say that. So whatever the problem is can be resolved.
Nice. I had no idea. See, I didn't know that. A month. Okay, tells you what I know. 48
Well, I
hours.
mean,
Good to know.
yeah, most people have that impression, like, oh, it takes them forever to fix the potholes, but nobody reports it. I mean, like, how many times at work do we have like computer equipment issues, and they're like, oh, it's been on the fritz for 3 weeks, and did you report it? Well, no, I'm sure somebody else did.
Right, which is why it's been on the fritz for 3 weeks
Right.
because everybody else thought somebody else would report it, and so the poor comm support's like, "What do you mean 3 weeks? If you'd have told us about it, we'd have been here yesterday." What in the
hmm
world?
Well, everyone, thank you for joining us this week as we discussed being always on duty, alert, and aware while working in your job. From everyone here at Lifeline 911 Podcast, I'm Gary,
I'm Erica.
and we will see you next week.
Thank you for watching our production of Lifeline 911 Podcast. If you have any questions about the topics we discussed today, or if there's something specific you'd like us to cover in a future episode, send us your questions at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. Stay safe out there. Until next time, this is Lifeline 911 signing off.